In this video, we will fix the problem we have with the wrist joint and claw not facing the proper direction when we move the arm. To do this, we will need to add a new control bone that will control the movement of the IK chain. Then we can parent the wrist bone to the IK bone so that everything follows properly with each other and we avoid dependency loops. I also take another deep dive into dependency loops, explaining what they are and how to solve them using a separate control bone as the parent overall. Welcome back to the robot arm animation series. In the last video we talked about inverse kinematics and we set up our IK chain, our control bone, and our pull target, all of which helps us move the armature, the bones, just by using one control bone. And we can move this around really easily and place it where we want. We also went over a whole bunch of things like resetting our pose, creating a shortcut to do that, which we have A to select all of them, Q in our quick favorites, and then select all to go back to our resting pose. And we also talked about dependency loops. If you haven't watched the first video, I highly recommend watching that first before continuing with this one. So in this video, we're going to focus on the wrist and the wrist control. So as smoothly as this does move right now, you can see that the wrist doesn't actually follow the rest of the robot arm like we would expect. So for example, if we bring this, bring this over here. Now let's come up here. On this side, you can see that it's facing the wrong direction. We would expect this to be, if I rotate this on the Z-axis, something like this. And then we could rotate it up like this. And something like this. So that's how we would expect it to look when we move this. And if we have to do this every time we move it, so if we want to move it back, then we have to R, Z, and then move that. And that's just an extra step, and that's going to slow down our process way too much. And it also sort of defeats the purpose of having our inverse kinematics, because the point is to make this as smoothly and easily as possible using just one control, one or two controls. So let's select everything, Q, and then all to go back to our resting pose, and then go into side view here. And I'm just going to select this bone, press H to hide it, just to get it out of the way here for now. So the most straightforward way to make sure this faces the proper direction is to parent this to this bone. Because then, if it's parented, it will follow this bone wherever it goes. So then it should be facing the right direction. But this is the wrong way to do it, and I'll show you why. So let's just go ahead and do it. And normally what I do in this instance, if we tab into edit mode, we can then select this and shift select this, and then Control P to parent, and then keep offset. I am not going to do it this way, but I'm going to show you a different way because then you can visualize it a little bit better. And let's just go ahead and hide this one here in edit mode as well. Go back into pose mode and select this bone here. And then our bone constraints properties, come up to add bone constraint, and then child of. And now we can select our target by coming here to armature. And then for our bone, we can choose the bone IK, which is this yellow bone. So now we have this parented to this, so it should move with this, you would think. So then we click this and move, and you can see it just going haywire. It's just kind of glitching out all over the place. And if you watched the last video, you know exactly why this is. This is called a dependency loop. And that just means since this bone is parented to this bone, it's depending on this bone for its movement. But we already have this bone depending on this bone for its movement. So this is the bone control, this is the bone IK. The bone IK has the bone control as the target, which is its parent. And the bone control has the bone IK as its parent. And so both of them are parents of each other, and both of them are children of each other at the same time. So they both depend on each other for its movement. So this one here is following this one, and then this one is following this one, which is following this one, which is following this one. So Blender doesn't really know how to calculate that because you start to move it and it's like, oh, okay, this one's moving, but this one's moving, this one's moving, this one's moving. So there's an easy way to fix this actually, and that is to add in another control that both of these can follow. And if both of these are children of one parent, then they are not parents of each other. They are siblings. And so siblings don't follow other siblings, they only follow parents. So let's make another control and have it be the parent of both of these. So this is where we want to go into side mode, tab into edit mode, and we are not in a resting pose now, so let's go back into pose mode, select everything, Q all to reset that pose. Now we can tab into edit mode, and I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to press Shift D, and that duplicates this. If I start moving my mouse, you can see it's duplicated. Now, before I do anything, I'm going to right click, and that places it right back here. You can see if I press G, I can grab that and move that again. So we still have two of them. They're just right over each other. So I'm going to press S to scale and bring that out a little bit. Now notice if you have your mouse right here when you press S to scale, it's going to have a huge impact with your movement. It's best to move it away a little bit and then press S to scale. That way you can have a little bit more accuracy. But now we can't see the bone inside. So let's come to our object properties. This is for the whole armature. And then scroll down to viewport display, and then under display as, choose wire. And now we can see through our bones and be able to select the bones that are inside other bones. Now you have to kind of finagle with this a little bit. You have to kind of click multiple times in order to get the one inside selected, but it's generally not too difficult. So I'm going to select the one inside because that was the first one we had. And let's go rename that bone because right now it's bone control, but we don't want this to be the control anymore. We're going to name this wrist, because that's essentially what it is and what it's going to do. It's going to control our wrist. And for this one, we want to name this bone move because that's what we want this one to do. And if I grab this, you can see that this is not parented to anything, and neither is this. So let's just tab back into pose mode. And by the way, whatever I have selected in pose mode, I also have selected in edit mode. You can see that. So we want to take our bone wrist and our bone IK and make them children of this bone. So let's select our bone wrist and then come back to our bone constraints. And we're going to turn the child of from bone IK to bone move. And we broke our rig, but not really. All we have to do is click set inverse and it should be... I guess no. I guess not. So what we're going to do is just get rid of this completely. And we're going to start over. So with our bone selected, add in a new child of, and then armature, and then bone move. There we go. Sometimes in Blender, that's what you have to do. Okay, now we need to tell the IK bone to have the target as the move as well. So we're going to do that right here. And that didn't break our rig, but now we can take the bone move and move it, and oh, it hasn't solved our problem. And the reason for this is because you can see since we duplicated this bone to make this bone, we have a child of. So this is actually still a child of the bone IK. So we're just going to get rid of that altogether. And now when we move this, oh, now it's really smooth. But we haven't actually solved our problem. You can see the wrist isn't moving along with the IK bone. And that's because we actually need this to be a child of this, not a child of this. So let's reset our pose and then take the bone wrist. We're going to choose bone IK. And of course, this breaks it again. So let's start from scratch here. Child of, armature, and bone IK. All right. So hopefully now we can take our control and move it. Yes, this is exactly what we want. And let's scroll out here and see how we can move that. Yes. And then we can take this one, rotate it independently, and then it still will follow how it's supposed to, generally speaking. We need to mess a little bit more with the rotation here, but as far as the control goes, this is how we would expect this to move. Now, generally, I would not include the mistake in parenting in the video if I made a mistake, but I included this one just so you can see what's happening. So we had these two as children of this one, which broke the dependency loop, but then we realized, oh, well, this one is still not moving along with this one, and then so that we can parent this one to this one. And I wanted you to see that process because, one, so that you know that I make mistakes all the time and it's okay to make mistakes. And two, so that you can see how to fix those kind of mistakes and the logic behind what I'm doing here. And sometimes this gets a little bit cluttered and a little bit confusing. So I'm going to demonstrate this with some simple objects. So here I've got two simple objects. I've got a cube that I've lengthened a little bit, and then I've got Suzanne, which is a little monkey head here. If I move Suzanne, you can see that I've made this cube follow and face wherever the monkey head is. And I've done this using a track 2 constraint, which we will talk about in another video more in depth. But for now, it just makes it face whatever target we want it to. So this is kind of acting like our bone. So this is like our IK bone, and this is like the wrist. So what I'm trying to achieve with this is when I move Suzanne, then the back of her head will constantly face the cube so that she's looking away from it like this at all times. So let's undo that here. And so what we did at the very start is add a constraint, a child of, and we're going to choose the cube. And then if I move this, we have some glitching going on, and it's moving like way over here, which we don't want it to. We want it to stay right here. And to see this glitching even more, if I undo this, if I get rid of this and do the traditional parenting, so select this one, shift select this one, and then control P, set parent to object, keep transform. And now if I select this and I move this, you can see, wow, that really starts to wig out and go crazy there. And that's just your dependency loop. So coming here, we have this one parented to this one, and this one is looking at this one. So when this one moves because it's looking at this. But then when this one moves, this is parented to this, so this one moves. So there's your loop. This one follows this one, which follows this one, which follows this one, which follows this one. So what we did was we added in another object. And here I'm just going to add in an empty sphere. To break this loop, we're going to take this and we're going to choose, instead of Suzanne, we're going to choose the empty. So now, instead of this one looking at that one for its movement, it's now looking at this one for its movement. So you can see there's no actual loop here. It starts here because this is the parent of this one, and this is the parent of this one. So this depends on this one for its movement, and then this depends on this one for its movement. And this one doesn't depend on anything for its movement. Thus, the cycle is broken. So let's see what that looks like. Oh, and I actually didn't parent this one, so let's go ahead and do that same thing. Child of, select this one, and now we move this, and this is exactly what we want. So we're moving this one as our control to move everything, and this one looks at this one all the time, and this one follows this one. Now I can rotate this still independently, so rotate on the X, down, like that. And this would be acting like our wrist. So up and down for the wrist, and this is our control to move both of those at the same time. And ideally what you would want to do is have this one right over this one. And then you just grab this and move that up and down and all around. So coming back here, that's what's happening here. So this is like our Suzanne monkey head, and this is our control. This one's looking at this one for its movement, and this one is parented to this one for its movement. And this one isn't parented to anything. It can move freely however it wants. Now I may be over-explaining this, but when you start introducing more bones and more controls and have a more complex rig, things can get really confusing and out of control really quickly. So it's good to understand the concepts behind what's happening with each control and each bone. And speaking of reducing complexity, what we can do next is give our bones a better shape so that we can see them more clearly and select them more easily. So when you're ready, head on over to the next video.